published a kind of a sad story on Tuesday about a lack of funding for Say Yes to Education. At the very moment, our Cleveland's Premise series is showing how valuable it is. You ought to read it on cleveland.com. It's a story we'll talk about when Layla's back. We have a bunch of other things to talk about on this episode of Today in Ohio, the news podcast discussion from cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. I'm Chris Quinn. I'm here with Lisa Garvin, Laura Johnston, and because it's Wednesday, our City Hall reporter, Courtney Astolfi. We got stories to chat about. Let's get going. Laura, is the inexplicable move by Cuyahoga County Council to buy a toxic site for the new jail suddenly dead after all these months of going forward?
Well, it's definitely put on ice because the county council decided that they are going to postpone all decisions on jail-related legislation until the next executive takes office, which is what the executive candidates have been asking for weeks. They previously tabled this at a committee of the whole meeting that Caitlin Durbin attended, and the County Council President Purnell Jones said he believes that the further delay is a mistake. He talked about the years that they've been putting into this, the millions of dollars in research, but they are backing down, and he says council will be ready to work in good faith to consider the proposal next.
I'm surprised by this only because despite the mounting number of reasons they should do this, they hadn't done it, that they continued to press forward. I mean, this made sense to go and spend money on a site when two candidates said, I'm not building there, I'll sell it, even if it costs us money.
Right.
Pretty much should have stopped it. And then you separately had the prosecutor's office saying, I'm going to sue you to stop this because I'm going to gum up the works until the new executive comes in. This is a bad idea. But despite all that, they kept pressing forward. And we talked about it repeatedly. What are they thinking? I don't know what changed their minds, but I think history will look favorably on the decision if they quickly get in action once the new executive comes in, pick the right site for it, get moving on this. This will be a good day for the residents of Cuyahoga County.
Right. But the way that council, it sounds like, is that there are a lot of angry members of council that they feel pushed into this position because they've been talking about this for so long. And they were saying, we talked last week about the steering committee members who voted against this and said, we don't want the jail on this site. And he's saying they're acting, or Purnell Jones, I believe, is saying that they're acting out of self-interest, that the prosecutor's office and the judges don't want this jail away from their courthouse, which, I mean, they're just pointing fingers. I guess Michael Gallagher, a council person, talked for about a half hour. Caitlin called his rhetoric incendiary. And so they're not saying, okay, we agree this is the right decision. Obviously, they feel cornered because of everything that's happened. And they're saying, fine, we'll wait, but we think it's the wrong decision.
To say it's self-interest is a little bit unfair. They do want, the people that are fighting this do want money in the budget to build a new justice center because they think the residents of Cuyahoga County should have a functioning justice center. To say it's their self-interest, I mean, they don't profit by it. It's just the office where they work. I'm not sure it's as much keeping the jail and the courthouse together as it is making sure you don't put it on a toxic site. Look, they kept saying we can remediate this. But the question is, why? Why even go to a site that you have to remediate when there are options for sites you don't? Mike O'Malley is looking at the lawsuits coming from Camp Lejeune, and he's looking across the country at other kinds of lawsuits like this, saying, the person that succeeds me 10 and 15 and 20 years from now, if we build it here, we'll be spending a lot of time and taxpayer money defending lawsuits by people that say, this is on a toxic site, that's why I got sick. Even if it's not true. The lawsuits will be filed. So don't do it. Go get a site that's not like this. We never really understood why they were pushing so hard. They kept saying, we're told we can remediate it. Who cares? Don't do it. Go someplace you don't have to remediate, and then you avoid.
Well, but how many places are there?
Looking to Franklin County, which went. There are, though. They have there was a site that came up in Garfield Heights that was right next to the interstate that they really didn't explore. That's not toxic at all. They
got to
really
think there has to be something better.
Right. And the word is that they really didn't go deep with the land bank to say, are there ways to assemble some parcels? Is there someplace, so look, they're going to have to move quickly. The building is bad. Although we have talked about is it the building that's causing the problems, or is it the mismanagement? The building didn't kill people for most of the time it was there. It's in bad shape. There's no doubt about it. But how much of a rush do you need? If you manage that place better, would you have good
Well,
quality care? We have a story coming this weekend that's going to get into some of those mismanagement issues, and they sound pretty atrocious.
they do,
Go
but I
ahead.
don't think that anyone is arguing that the jail is really set up to be a good place for people
No.
to live, to spend months of their life. And the reason they need so many people working on it is the way that it's set up. I mean, we've gone over and over in this before, but I mean, just to underscore, we're talking about a toxic site with benzene where the remediation, we don't even know how many millions of dollars it would cost. And what if something breaks? I mean, I just think about that. Everything always breaks. And if you've got these very complicated technologies that, diminish the gas from underground and put it up in the air, and something's going to go wrong at some point. Like, we know this, things break down. I just don't understand the rush and the risk.
Yeah, and the other thing that's really come to roost is they built the second of the two jail buildings in 1990s, and by then jail philosophy had changed. That building was obsolete for modern jail practices before it was built, and you got to wonder what were people thinking back then, because elsewhere in the country they were having conferences about the better way of doing this. It's more humane, it's safer, it's less expensive, and yet they built the obsolete building in terms
Maybe they
of
thought we got to
providing.
get it done. The costs are just going to keep going up, which is the same rhetoric we're hearing now.
Yeah, maybe they did. Maybe there wasn't a podcast back then saying, "Wait a minute, what are you doing?"
There was not
It's
a
still
podcast back
Ohio.
in 1996.
Twice failed candidate for U.S. Senate, or is it thrice failed? Josh Mandel went to a distant county, Ashland, to file his divorce papers a few years back to keep them from prying eyes, and a judge sealed them from public view. Why was that not okay, Courtney?
Yeah, it's the Ohio Supreme Court saying this move was not okay by the Ashland County Common Pleas Judge, Ronald Forsthoffel. Apologies if I butchered that. He sealed these records from Josh Mandel and his ex-wife Alana, I think 21 different documents or pages back in 2020. The Mandels had filed a motion to seal up all their divorce paperwork. They didn't cite any legal authority why that was a legally sound move, and the judge back then didn't explain any legal reasoning as to why that was okay to do that. And so enter the Cincinnati Enquirer. They came in and they sued to force a vacation of the judge's order that sealed those records up and basically let the public get a hold of them and check them out. Firsthoffel, he argued the Cincinnati Enquirer was moot because Mandel later released redacted copies of these records to the press. But the Ohio Supreme Court called nonsense. They pointed out the Enquirer wasn't necessarily seeking to get their hands on the documents themselves. They were seeking a vacation of the judge's order, sealing them up. And the Ohio Supreme Court also kind of called shenanigans. The Enquirer's case was about the document as a whole, not whatever Josh Mandel selectively redacted and chose to release to the public.
Yeah, a big tip of the hat to Beryl Love and the team at the Cincinnati Enquirer for pursuing this. It's not cheap to pursue these cases, and this was a good one to set on principle. This thing stunk to the high heavens. I mean, Josh Mandel had always run as the family man, the guy devoted to his family. And then he dropped out of a Senate race, surprising everybody. The Republican Party had put a lot of stock in him running against Sherrod Brown. He dropped out summarily overnight, and then very quickly thereafter scurries off to a distant county to file divorce papers, not doing it locally where people would have noticed. And then I'd never understood how a judge could seal them. It's almost like the powerful taking care of the powerful. When Josh decided to run again for the Senate this year, for the seat being vacated by Rob Portman, he knew this was a big problem. And so he invited reporters down to the law offices of his lawyers, and they did go through them with reporters. They were redacted, but as I recall, very little so. I mean, what was removed were the things that are often removed from public records, like Social Security numbers and things. I think when Andrew Tobias went through them, we saw them completely. But it is the principle of the thing, Courtney.
Right.
It's that the court shouldn't have done this. This is the public's business. That's why courts are public. And the judge was way out of line sealing these records. And frankly, you shouldn't be allowed to go to a county where you're not a resident to file your divorce papers. You should have to do that in the community where you live.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting here. I mean, this is a win for public records in Ohio, right? And the Supreme Court was really kind of forceful in how they explained how wrong this judge's decision was. They basically said not only does the judge's order fail to explain why he thought it was okay to wholesale seal these documents, but he didn't say if he considered a less restrictive means here. He just did not approach this properly, and the Supreme Court called that out.
Yeah, it's an abuse of judicial discretion, and the guy should actually be in trouble for doing it. This was wrong in every way possible. Good for the Supreme Court. Pretty much, was it unanimous? I know there were concurring opinions. Nobody dissented on this, though, right?
It doesn't look like it, but Justice Sharon Kennedy wrote her own opinion. So
yeah, she thought a different part of the law applied than what the majority, but they all said in the strongest way possible, Judge, you can't do it. Shame on you. And we agree. Shame on you. It's Today in Ohio. Downtown Cleveland's vacancy rate for offices is down, according to one report. But Lisa, that's not really good news in the office sector. How come?
Well, it's because a lot of these places are being converted into apartment buildings, which is good in its own way. But there are actually two reports that we looked at from real estate firms. The Jones Lang LaSalle firm, or JLL, their reporting went all the way back to March of 2020. And they say since that time, office vacancies have dropped 0.3% from 14.9 to 14.6% last month. About 1.3 million square feet of office space has been converted to apartments, according to this report. But they point out that 2 million square feet of office space is under construction right now downtown, including the Sherwin-Williams building. Not sure how much square footage is there. It will be the fourth tallest building downtown, which I didn't know. Another report from the real estate firm of Newmark, that's their third quarter report, so it only covers the last 3 months. They say the vacancy rate downtown decreased from 19% to 18.5% over last year. Asking rental prices, though, are only up 1 penny per square foot, and they don't expect any future large rent increases downtown. Both reports said this, but they also found that subleases have increased. So that just shows that a lot of offices are downsizing. Some are moving to the suburbs to lower their costs and have a smaller footprint.
Well, we're going to be doing some more work on this because there is a frightening trend involved in that as offices convert to residential, because the residential gets abatement for 15 years, the taxes plummet.
Mm.
The other thing is there is no abatement for people that develop offices, except in the case of gigantic projects like Sherwin-Williams, where people are throwing money at them. So if I have a building, I can save a lot of money by making it residential that I can't save if I make it for offices. So the city's policy pretty much discourages office development. And you can see over time how that's affecting things. And as I understand it, that they consider the occupancy for an office building 4 people per whatever the measurement is, where it's 1 for residential. So it's affecting downtown in a way that I don't think there's been a public discussion about. So these are chilling numbers in some ways,
Yeah.
unless it's deliberate. I mean, if you say, you know what, we need fewer offices, let's make downtown a big residential neighborhood. Okay, fine. But that's not what anybody ever said. And it doesn't seem like anybody is actually at the wheel saying, what's our vision here?
Well, and I do think downtown residency is important, but when it starts to take over, I firmly believe that a vibrant downtown hinges on offices and businesses. That's just my opinion. And if you make it more residential and less, of a work center, I think that there are negative impacts.
Yeah, it is. And I think we're reaching a crisis point. And look, when the pandemic began, we talked about how who's going to be the visionary that figures out the future of downtown. And as you talk to people that are involved in this business in Cleveland, basically nobody is thinking about it. And so there's some drive now to get a conversation going. And it'll take us a little while to get the stories together, but we'll have some stuff on it soon. It's Today in Ohio. The Ohio Debate Commission formed 4 years ago with the sole aim of being a neutral agency staging debates for key statewide races. So how is it possible that the commission is holding no debates this election season, which has a bunch of key statewide races? And Laura, I don't know how long I have to keep disclosing this. I was one of the founding members of the Debate Commission. I was on the board of the Debate Commission until spring, but I've had no connection to it since.
So basically, the debate commission this season, can't get anyone to come to their debates. And I feel that's where we kind of cue, it's my party and I'll cry if I want to. If we ever did that, where we added clips. But this is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that was created in 2018 for the sole purpose of hosting these big debates. And this year, they wanted to host debates for the U.S. Senate, Governor, and Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, all for the general election. And the Democrats largely have agreed. Of course, they're the underdogs in all these races, and they basically can't get the Republicans to say, okay, I'll face off.
We've talked about the governor's race, and it's kind of shameful he's not debating. We're still waiting to get confirmation he's going to appear before editorial board with his opponent Nan Whaley, and J.D. Vance said he wasn't going to participate with the debate commission debates because the head of it has been Democratic activist in the past, although she's not. She's very neutral in the role. The Supreme Court, though, I thought would happen, because when I was on the debate commission, one of my chief purposes 2 years ago was to stage Supreme Court debates. And both Sharon Kennedy and Jennifer Brunner appeared for those debates. We had put together an advisory panel with a retired Republican Supreme Court justice, a retired Democrat Supreme Court justice, and Ron Adrian, the retired Cleveland Municipal Court judge, to advise us on the kinds of questions the candidates can answer. And then the advisory panel members cajoled the judges, the candidates, to participate, and they did, and they largely had a good experience. Mm-hmm. So I cannot, for the life of me, understand why Sharon Kennedy balked this time. It was not a bad experience for her, and she ended up winning. So there wasn't really an explanation of what the breakdown was, because they said they did those discussions in confidence.
Right.
But something changed.
They said the campaign was very actively engaged, trying to work out details, and they were unable to get past something. But I don't know why, except that maybe she doesn't want to answer for the redistricting issues. These are big deals of who controls the Supreme Court, because they're going to be looking at really hot button issues like redistricting, abortion, a lot of energy issues, and maybe she just doesn't want to have to answer any questions.
But you really can't ask those questions, because that is a matter before them. That's what we learned. They could ask her, because she's been really bad about this. Is it appropriate for you to be discussing your views on an issue when it will come before you? She's been out taking money from anti-abortion groups to speak to them, and all three of them have made their opinions known on abortion. Eric Foster has a great column about that we published today. So maybe that's it. But I thought that one would happen. And so now it's a big goose egg for the debate commission. And you got to wonder, what's the future for it if they can't get people to appear for the debates?
Well, they say they're looking at whether to get involved in municipal races in 2023. I guess those might be easier to get. And they are holding some kind of event for, I think, high school students and about democracy, which is cool, but that's not the reason that they exist.
I think they need to get some Democratic and Republican Party people on their board to help facilitate this. I think part of the reason they're getting into roadblocks is Republicans really don't feel like they're represented on the board. Sad day. Go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to say that they are trying to figure out how to get more direct from the candidates' answers without being, paid advertising or just stump speeches. And so I do have to salute them and their goal of getting these debates before the public. I mean, it is an important task.
It's really noble. It's why we invested some real money in it when it began. And the voters are the losers here because this was a noble effort. They put a lot of time into it, and they don't get anything for the voters. It's Today in Ohio. Cleveland's tourism industry is rebounding nicely from the pandemic, even though it's still down before the pandemic began. Courtney, what's the latest?
Yeah, so we learned that the greater Cleveland area saw 16 million visitors in 2021. That's kind of our big first global look at last year's results. And, that's down from the 19.6 million we saw just prior to the pandemic in 2019. But it is climbing up from those record lows that happened in 2020. We're 17% above our 2020 visitor numbers. Cleveland before the pandemic was on pace to go over that $20 million mark in visitors, but obviously it's going to take a little while before we can recover and keep heading in that direction. Reporter Susan Glaser notes that our rebound's looking better than other the big cities, New York City and Chicago. Those cities have not rebounded nearly as much as we have. They're hovering around half, it sounds like, of their pre-COVID numbers. But, she notes that, Cleveland's return here is thanks in part, at least partially, to the fact of our location. We're easy to get to from a good chunk of the U.S. and the Eastern Seaboard. But she did also note that we're still lagging the rest of Ohio. Rural areas, particularly Hocking Hills, really jettisoned up their visitor numbers in the last 2 years, and we're not quite to that level where we are statewide.
That's because they're outdoors.
Right.
People go to the state parks because they're outdoors.
Right.
Did I read it right, or are our numbers around where we were 10 years ago? Because we had a chart that looked like that you had to go back pretty far to the level we're at.
Yeah,
now.
so around 16 million last year, and that's right about where we were in 2013. So it's been steady increases by about a million, less than a million each year, and we're back a decade.
Yeah, we got a ways to go. It's Today in Ohio. Ohio just keeps getting good manufacturing news with some huge investments. What is the new plan announced by Honda for the state, Lisa?
Yeah, there's a $4.2 billion project in the works, and this is a joint effort between Honda and LG Energy Solutions. They're going to be building an electric vehicle plant in Fayette County, which is southwest of Columbus. It should be finished in 2024 and will provide 2,200 permanent jobs. Honda is also spending an additional $700 million to transform their existing plants in Anna, East Liberty, and Marysville, and they will be retooled to make electric vehicle parts. Governor DeWine says that the state offered incentives, but we don't have any details yet from the Ohio Department of Development. And Jobs Ohio spokesman Matt Engelhardt says they are also providing financial assistance to all of the projects listed, but no details until the final agreement.
Well, and often we don't get the details from Jobs Ohio. We talked earlier in the week about how we found out what they were kicking in for the flight to Ireland only because Cleveland made a paperwork mistake or an online mistake. It's a problem with the secrecy. So we could be paying Honda many, 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 many millions, and we just don't know it. It does feel like, though, about every week for a long time, we've had news of a huge investment in manufacturing in this state. It's good news for jobs, although none of it's in Northeast Ohio, or very little of it is in Northeast Ohio.
And Governor DeWine's opponent in the governor's race, Nan Whaley, accused DeWine of only focusing on Central Ohio for economic development, although DeWine pointed back to the Sherwin-Williams building, although I would point out that Sherwin-Williams was already here. But she does have a point, but going back to the jail discussion in brownfields, I think, Cuyahoga County it was an industrial county. There's a lot of brownfields, and if we don't clear those brownfields for development, then we're going to be, lagging in the race.
Well, and a lot of these companies are looking for some pretty big plots of land, and we don't have that. We did not have anything that could have satisfied Intel. That we just don't have it in Cuyahoga County because of how built out we are. So, but look, it's great news for the state, and we're part of the state, even though the legislature likes to think we're just here to provide money for everybody else. It's Today in Ohio. We talked a lot about the problems plaguing the corrupt East Cleveland Police Department, wondering why elected officials cannot get things under control. We'll soon know if residents are fed up based on an Ohio Supreme Court decision to give the voters there some say. Laura, what's the decision about?
Well, these folks are allowed to decide if they want to recall their mayor. And the reason is this has gone to the Supreme Court is that Mayor Brandon King and the city's law director, Willa Hemmons, wanted to stop the election in November, saying that the petition to the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections should have been disqualified because it exceeded more than 200 words. But basically, the high court said they have no authority over this. The Board of Elections doesn't, because it's the city charter that governs the recall process for an elected East Cleveland official. And 7 out of the last 13 recall positions certified by the East Cleveland's Clerk of Council to the county's Board of Elections since 2015 included statements exceeding 200 words. Can I just go back at that, though? 13 recall petitions since 2015. That's 7 years. That's 2 a year trying to recall people in East Cleveland. That's kind of crazy.
Well, it's the city's in chaos. The police department has a gigantic percentage of officers under indictment. They're broke. They can't serve their residents. I mean, just about everything that can go wrong is going wrong. So in disgust, no sooner do they elect somebody than they're trying to unelect them because they want somebody that's going to solve the problem. In this case, you have to wonder why the mayor didn't fire the police chief and go and find a new police chief, because the police department is so out of control. The residents are being terrorized by the police force.
I mean, I think he stood behind the chief. It wasn't just that he didn't fire him. It was that he believed that they should be chasing people through East Cleveland, which literally caused people to die. I mean, it's horrendous what is going on in this town. And I'd like to point out here that Brandon King came in after they recalled the last mayor, Gary Norton, in 2016. There was a recall election. King was elected, then he was reelected. If I remember correctly, the turnout for these elections has been incredibly low. So maybe this time people will get out and vote.
Yeah, I mean, Gary Norton was the one person that ever held authority there that wanted to work to merge East Cleveland with Cleveland to try and change the trajectory. But like you said, the voters tossed him. It's Today in Ohio. All right, the Guardians did lose their first game to the Yankees, but on the good news day, when they won the game that sent them to New York, it was a teenager who caught the game-winning home run in the 15th inning that gave them the win. What's the story on that teenager, Courtney?
This is just a delightful story by reporter Mark Bona. He talked to 16-year-old Megan Forshee. She's a Westlake girl, and she's a high school junior. She plays softball for the Westlake High Demons. And her skills were definitely on display for the world when she caught that amazing, home run from Oscar Gonzalez over the weekend. She's a right-handed player, and she kind of definitely moved over to the left. She said she had her eye on the ball as soon as it left his bat, tracked it all the way, and she just landed that catch beautifully. And she recalled kind of the moment there. She was sitting next to her dad, and just how they were in shock and kind of screaming and hugging. And she's a baseball fan. She wants to go to the divisional series, this week against the Yankees if she can swing it. I thought it was really interesting. Bona talked to an auction house who valued the ball at $5,000 to $10,000. Now Megan doesn't know if she's going to hold on to it yet. She might have Oscar sign it, but she said she'd be willing to trade it back, which is kind of an option when these things happen.
Well, but the ball, according to the story, it gets worth more the deeper they go into the playoffs. So she ought to hold on to it to see what the value is. I did think it was interesting. Mark asked her who her favorite player was, and for the longest time, it had been one guy, but not anymore.
Here's her quote. This is a great one. She said her favorite player, I would say Jose Ramirez was, but now I probably have to say Oscar Gonzalez.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's Today in Ohio. That's it for Wednesday. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Laura. Thanks to everybody who listens to this podcast.